Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just keeping an eye on the participants as my colleague Natalie lets everybody in. So we seem to have settled on 29. So I'll get started. My name is Bernadette Cahill. I am a trainer for Place to Be. And today we're going to be continuing our Spotlight On series where we're looking in depth at some issues of concern to school staff. And today we're going to be looking at the issue of self-care for all of those wonderful people out there, all of you who are doing such sterling work in schools at the moment. So we're going to be together for about an hour. And at the end of the webinar, I'll be doing a brief mindfulness meditation. It'll just be a few minutes, but obviously that's optional for you to engage in, and you don't have to have your screen on, so I can't see any of you. So it's very private. And then there'll be an opportunity for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat function, make a note of them as we're going along, and I'll do my best to answer those for you. Okay, so let's look at the themes that we're going to cover today. So we're going to look at why we need to be thinking about self-care, why self-care is an important issue for school staff. So today, we're not going to be looking at the strategic elements, although I will identify concerns as they arise in the course of the training. But today we're really looking at what we need to do as individuals to take better care of ourselves and how we can apply some of this learning to our professional and private lives. So we're going to be looking at stress. So some of the reasons that we need to think more about self-care is the sort of stresses we're all facing in the 21st century. And you'll be very aware that mental health issues are very much in the news. They were on the up and up for children and young people, as well as school staff, before the pandemic came our way. So those issues are even more acute now. So we're going to be looking at some of the causes of stress and how we can manage stress more effectively. We'll be looking at chronic stress and its impact on physical and mental health. And we'll be looking at some of the principles of self-care. We'll be using a couple of strategies to look at where we are in terms of stressors and in terms of well-being. We'll be paying some attention to self-care in the pandemic. So with all of the restrictions in place, that makes it even more difficult. Well, it appears to make it more difficult, but indeed we'll be looking at tips and strategies for improving your resilience and well-being and improving your capacity to integrate self-care into your everyday life, your personal life, and your private life. So just before we move on to the issues in this slide, I just want to think for a moment about self-care and how we're going to approach it today. So I'm not going to give you a tick box list of all the things you could be doing after school to improve your self-care, because we will cover the generalities, but most of you are probably aware of the things you should be doing, but struggle to fit into your busy days. And really what I want to focus on today is a mindset, really. So we talk a lot about mindsets when it comes to children, growth mindsets, positive mindsets, but often we don't apply that thinking to ourselves. So self-care really is about a mindset. It's about thinking positively about how you can integrate some self-care practice into the things that you have control over. So essentially that's the way you think, it's your feelings, and it's your behavior. So it's about thinking positively, it's about integrating some of the strategies, small steps into your daily life, both your professional life and your private life. It's about reducing stress, and we'll look at some of those ideas today, and about increasing the opportunity for rest and repair and recovery. So when we're managing our well-being well, we all experience stress, but there's opportunity for recovery and for rest and repair, as it's known in the parlance. So when we think about that in regard to children, children do that through play. That's how they rest and repair, after a busy day in the classroom or a busy lesson. They'll find some way to promote that rest and repair. So they might chat, they might, doodle, they might play a game, they might run around in the playground. And really, we need to find the adult variations on that theme. How do we incorporate play and rest into our daily life? So mental health in the school community was a significant issue before the pandemic started. And as you'll be aware, that has only got worse. So a recent survey in the TES cited that nearly half of teachers are drained and exhausted, and that was before the third lockdown, possibly before the second lockdown indeed. And a third are just about coping, and 15% of school staff are physically and mentally on the brink. And in this statement from Sinead McBrearty from Education Support, she says, if we are reckless with the health of the education workforce, we cannot expect children and young people to have the support they need to get through this difficult year. And often people like us who have a vocation for the work we do, we're not very good at prioritizing ourselves. We're not very good at setting boundaries and saying no. We just think, a little bit more won't make any difference. But that's not true. A little bit more over the course of a career can result in poor mental health, poor physical health, and chronic general health problems that will make life difficult as you age. So you might be able to do it in your 20s and even in your 30s, but all schools are seeing early retirement of senior staff, staff new to the profession leaving prematurely. So these are really important issues for all of us to take on, including school leadership and governing bodies. So let's have a think about stress. So stress is one of those things that has a really bad rap. We see it as something to avoid or something bad or negative. But in truth, we all need a certain amount of stress to get through our day. So if we didn't have to go to work, we probably wouldn't get up for the alarm. We'd take ages to get ready. We'd not have much sense of direction in the course of a day. So if we need to work and we need to earn money, we need to have a job. So we need certain things to be in place in order to function well in the professional world. And when we don't have enough pressure or tension or stress, if you like, I'll use those terms interchangeably, we can become bored, unmotivated, lacking in creativity, disinterested, too comfortable, and really lose focus on the organizational aims or even our personal and professional aims. So some of you may have been in jobs where you've experienced that yourself, or certainly witnessed other colleagues who seem to be in that place. Sometimes it's easier to see it in others than it is in ourselves. You perhaps have all, stayed in a job a little bit too long. And perhaps later in a new job thought to yourself, I should have gone earlier than I did. So there's this term peak performance that doesn't refer to individuals who are super clever and super motivated. It's really a reference to a state of being that can apply to all human beings. And we've all experienced this at certain times. That moment when you really feel in the flow, where you feel energized and creative and your mind seems to be working really clearly and you're getting work done really quickly. That's called peak performance or peak flow. So we've all been there sometimes. You might not have necessarily noticed it at work, but you might have noticed it at home or vice versa. So peak performance refers to a state of being where we have just enough pressure, just enough stress, and we also have the support and resources we need to get that particular task done. And when we're in that state, and it's not a permanent state, it's one that ebbs and flows, we can really feel that we're doing a good job. But when that really precise balance between support and resources and energy shifts, and we can feel that there's too much stress and not enough of some of the other good stuff, we can begin to move further down this arch towards the red zone and towards the state of burnout. Now, I know as I say that, there'll be many of you thinking, I'm already there and I've been there for years. And certainly in my work in schools, I see quite a bit of that. So it can start by, I know that one of the symptoms for me is that feeling tired all the time, perhaps not sleeping well. Your brain begins to fog, you're not thinking clearly, you don't feel particularly creative, you're just getting through the day, you're just ticking the boxes, perhaps not feeling like you're doing a good job at anything in particular. And when we go down that arch towards burnout, we can start to second guess ourselves. We can imagine that this is something personal. Perhaps I'm just no good at my job. We can start to have really judgmental, critical thoughts about ourselves rather than thinking, do you know what? I recognize these symptoms and I think maybe I'm feeling overwhelmed and overstressed and I need to get some help with this. I either need to reduce my workload or I need greater resources, or I need some time out for rest and recuperation. Any of those three. So it's really, really important to think, to make an assessment about where we are at any given time on the stress arch. So some of you have probably heard of fight, flight, or freeze. This normally is sometimes called the stress response. So the stress response isn't something that happens to other people, no matter how chilled you are. So we all have an experience of fight or flight and freeze potentially, probably at several points during the day. And some of us will be in this state predominantly. So if you're a person who tends to be a bit stressy, who is overwhelmed with work, you might be here pretty much permanently. Now, the problem with this is that the stress response in our brain, which is sited in the amygdala, which is deep inside the primordial part of the brain, this was designed to be used occasionally. So early human beings probably only came across the stress response when they had a particularly difficult human interaction or when there were marauding tribes coming to steal their resources, or perhaps when they were out hunting and came across a wild animal. And because they were hunting long distances from home, they would have had the opportunity to perhaps hide or fight off their attackers, and certainly on the long walk home have an opportunity to reset and calm themselves down. But in today's modern world, we have stresses which are impacting on us pretty much on a permanent basis. And this has a lot to do with why we're seeing an increase in mental health problems, because our human body and our human brain isn't designed to cope with these chronic stressors. So they might be, notifications as soon as we wake up in the morning, challenging commutes where somebody cuts us up and we're feeling more and more aroused and stressed and we haven't even arrived at work. And then at work, bang, 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 different demands on us. If you're a class teacher or if you're in a non-classroom based role, the demands are pretty constant, particularly at the moment where we're all doing slightly different roles or delivering them differently. There really are lots of extra pressures on us. So it's really, really important that we give the body and the brain an opportunity to rest and recover at different points during the day. And many schools are now really understanding how important that is for children, that they need to have sensory breaks, not just children who are on the spectrum, but all children need to have sensory breaks, including opportunities for exercise and breathing and play throughout the school day in order to help them recover from those stressful events. So when children are stressed, they're much more likely to act out behaviorally or have an emotional breakdown if they don't get that opportunity to rest and recover and enable the body to return to normal functioning. And it's the same for adults. So what happens when this state of affairs goes on week after week, sometimes year after year? So when the stress response becomes chronic, the body is no longer able to return to a state of calm and repair. It doesn't do that automatically. And when we're in this state of chronic stress, this will have long-term impacts on our physical and mental health and well-being. So some of you will know, especially if you've done the Place to Be's Mental Health Champions Foundation program, you will know that those of us who have adverse childhood experiences in childhood are much more prone to chronic stress. So as children, we would have been responding to chronic stress, and unless we have a therapeutic intervention or somebody who can help us manage our stressors, so that could be a partner or a friend or a counselor, those things won't change and they tend to just get worse. And you may cope with them through your career, but you're setting yourself up for long-term health problems in your older years, potentially, if these issues aren't addressed. And of course, that has an impact on staffing, on sickness, on premature retirement, and those issues that I mentioned earlier. So someone who's experiencing chronic stress may present as worried, anxious, irritable, depressed or low in mood, indecisive, angry, or disengaged. So if we witness colleagues who appear to be like that, not just on an occasional basis, but on a regular basis, it's really important that we have a conversation with them to check out what's going on and how they're feeling and how they're coping. So I'm not going to go through these line by line, but all of these symptoms of stress will be fairly obvious to you, hopefully. And, it might be something that you can do when you receive the PowerPoints, maybe an exercise privately or perhaps in a staff meeting if you're looking at this issue of self-care, just to do, a very personal audit for yourself to see where you are. You might be quite surprised at how many symptoms of stress you're experiencing. And of course, this isn't a comprehensive list, so do feel free to add to it if you have other symptoms. So let's think about what self-care really means. As I said to you, it's not a list of things you need to do at the end of the school day. It's really about a mindset, and it's about that capacity to self-regulate. So we talk a lot about children self-regulating. In truth, for them, self-regulation is a laudable aim, because children need to be co-regulated by caring and sympathetic adults. Now, I often or sometimes need to be co-regulated by a loved one too. If I'm feeling distressed or wound up about something, it can really help to talk to another adult and for them to say, well, it sounds like you're feeling this, and I can really understand why you might be thinking that way or feeling that way. And that's really helpful. But most of the time, us grown-ups are expected to be able to self-regulate, aren't we, especially in our professional roles. So self-regulation is about creating a sustainable approach to life, your professional life and private life, and balancing your efforts with restoration. So again, it's balancing those stressors, the difficult parts of your day, the things that cause you tension and worry and stress, with that rest and recuperation, that restoration or play. So having a bit of fun, lightening the load, lightening the mood. Yeah. So let's look at some of the principles of self-care to give you a better idea of where I'm coming from. So self-care offers the possibility that we can flourish in our personal and professional life rather than merely surviving. So, you know, we all feel better about ourselves when we're thriving. And this isn't just about children. Children deserve to be taught and supported by school staff who are also thriving and not just dragging themselves in and getting through the day. So that's an aim for us all to hold in mind. The second is intentionality. So self-care isn't something that just happens because we wish it. You know, the intention is really, really important. And even if we're not immediately successful in whatever we try, it's important to hold on to that intention and to prioritize self-care, making it a routine part of your personal and professional life. Another way of thinking about it really, is to remember that you're a valuable person professionally in your private life. And there are individuals, children and other adults who really rely on you. So it's really, really important that you are looking after yourself. In Place to Be, we like the metaphor of the oxygen mask. You know, when you go on a flight, none of us have done that for a while, but back in the day, and when the air hostesses are going through the safety regulations, they say that when the oxygen mask drops down, it's really important that you put your own oxygen mask on first before you apply that to a child or another dependent. And we like that metaphor. This is really so relevant for school staff. You need to be looking after yourself before you can genuinely look after others in your care. The third principle is that of integration. So self-care is not an add-on. So an after-school yoga class is great, and that will really help if you're able to stick with it, but it's not enough. Some self-care needs to be integrated into the process of the day, not something that becomes another thing to do in your long list of obligations. And the fourth and final principle of self-care is reciprocity. And this is a really interesting idea, and I hope you can relate to it. When we take care of ourselves, we begin to recognize all the other parts of ourselves where we're not taking care of ourselves. We become more empathic. So the kinder and more compassionate you are to yourself, the more you recognize the need to be kind and compassionate to other people. And when we take care of ourselves, other people respond in kind. We are communicating how we expect other people to behave towards us. So if we're able to set a boundary to say no, or not now, or, I'm not able to do that just yet, we're giving people a very clear communication about our limits. And we are all entitled to negotiate our limits. Someone else might say no to us, but it doesn't mean the conversation is closed. So, we're teaching other people how to respond to us, how to behave towards us, and we're also modeling that behavior to other people around us. So if we're kind and caring towards ourselves, other people will take note and behave that way back to you, and also learn that as a strategy for themselves. So this is like throwing a pebble into a pond. The ripples are far-reaching. So, a little quote for you there: self-care is about giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you. So, I said to you earlier I wasn't going to give you a checklist on the things you need to be doing better because you've already got enough on your plate. But I really wanted to draw your attention to these models for emotional and physical well-being that are widely available. So this one is from the NHS, so you can access it yourself on the NHS website. They've got lots of great resources there. And also the mental health charity Mind have a very similar one. The reason they're similar is not because they're copying each other, but because these are evidence-based strategies for developing self-care and thinking about looking after staff in your school environments. So I'll go through them just briefly. So a lot of people think that maybe mental health and well-being is about maybe taking medication from the doctor or seeing a counsellor. And those things can be really useful and indeed essential at different times. But essentially, we develop positive mental health through our relationships with others. And it starts off when we're infants in our relationships with our primary caregivers. So when we're babies and entirely dependent on our mothers and fathers, we will look to them to meet our needs, and we'll communicate our needs through crying or grizzling or, being playful, following our mums with our eyes as they move around the room, by feeding well. All of those things communicate, and hopefully our mums and dads respond to us through kindness and compassion and empathy, trying to anticipate what our needs are and trying to understand what that grizzle means, or why we might be upset. Do we need a nappy change? Are we hungry? Are we bored? Do we need a little bit of stimulation? All of those things. So those early relationships create a blueprint for the way we relate to others. And the evidence tells us that the more positive, helpful, and supportive relationships we have in our world, the better our mental health is likely to be. So all is not lost if you're thinking, oh, but that's not me. I tend to have just a few close friends and a partner. We can create a community of support and kindness within our school communities, because you spend most of your days and your lives being with each other. So it makes sense to create, healthy and positive relationships with colleagues and peers. And you can do that by smiling, by connecting, by checking in with each other, by becoming a listening school, by becoming a school that learns through failure and making mistakes and tolerates failure and learning. All of those things will be really important in, enabling everyone to build more positive relationships and access support when they need it. So when we have relationships of trust, it's much easier to say, you know what, mate, I'm not coping here. I think I need a little bit more support. And that's the really important thing. So we're not suggesting, that you should never need specialist support or a targeted intervention, just like children and young people and parents do. School staff need that as well. So it'll be really important that you have an employee assistance program and some other access to support from your leaders and your colleagues, perhaps on a more universal level. So we all know that being physically active helps our physical health. You might not know that physical activity also supports our mental health. So physical activity helps all aspects of the self. And, I'm not suggesting that you should be running half marathons or, even doing some physical activity every day. If you're starting from doing nothing, that's fine. That's wonderful. You can only you can only go up and you can only get better. The really important thing for making changes regarding self-care and well-being is to start with something really small and really achievable. So if that's just going for a walk in the countryside on a Sunday with your loved ones, that is brilliant because it covers so many bases. You're physically active, you're connecting with others, people that you love, and you're out in nature. And the research is increasingly evidencing the positive effect that nature, particularly around water, particularly where there's movement, so the sea, rivers, lakes, has a positive impact on our mental well-being. And gradually you find you do something because you know it's good for you and because I'm suggesting it perhaps, but as you practice it and it becomes habitual, you might find you start doing it because you enjoy it. So it's about having fun and pleasure. And I can certainly attest to that in terms of physical activity. 5 years ago, I wasn't doing very much at all, and now I'm exercising every day. It also really helps to have someone to exercise with, and lockdown needn't be an excuse for not exercising. So we can all get out there and have a walk. So, you know, if that means going out for a 15-minute walk and your lunch break, maybe suggest that a group of you do it. You know, from in the lunchtime, or you join in the mile in the morning if you do that in your school, you know, or even after school. But start small, start achievable. Don't set yourself up for failure. So the evidence suggests that if we continue to learn throughout life, we continue to develop new neural pathways and keep our minds active. And certainly if you're looking for something to do during lockdown, if you're furloughed or you know, working from home and you just need a little bit of stimulation in the evening, switch the television off, close down your social media and do some online courses. You know, there's lots out there to choose from, and YouTube is a fantastic resource, particularly for doing exercise. You know, you can find 10-minute stretches, 5-minute breathing exercises. There's just so much there. So incorporate those things into your staff meetings. You know, decide to do 3 minutes of breathing each morning, each afternoon. You know, we can all start really small. So giving to others generally refers to volunteering. So there's lots of organizations, particularly working with vulnerable people, found that people's well-being and mental health improves when they start to focus on other people, even if they're quite vulnerable themselves. That has a positive impact on their well-being. Now, as busy school staff, you might not have the time if you're working full-time, but it might be that you decide to have some sort of charity collection in the staff room or in the school, you know, for a charity not connected, you know, to school life. It might be, you know, a good deeds jar or something like that, a raffle, something simple. And the last of the 5 steps to well-being is about being mindful. So mindfulness is about staying present in the moment. So quite often with our busy minds, we're always thinking ahead, planning, thinking, or we're worrying about the past, obsessing, you know, regurgitating, replaying past events, you know, checking them over. And both of those states of being are really unhelpful and keep our minds way too busy and stressed. So if we can take a moment at any point in the day just to look around the room that we're in, just note what we can see, note what we can hear, might be traffic going by. Use all of our senses to remain in the present moment, and perhaps just close our eyes and spend a moment focusing in on our breath. That can really help calm the amygdala, calm the vagus nerve, and bring us into that state of deep breathing where our bodies can recover. So I would really encourage you to explore that further. And as I say, we'll do a session towards the end. So we're coming towards the end of the session now. Just a few top tips for you. Small changes are key to forming a healthy habit. It doesn't matter how small, as long as they're achievable and you're doing them regularly enough to form a habit. Create a daily routine that integrates self-care. Just start with one thing. Build positive relationships in the whole school community. Smile, talk, listen. Ask for help and be prepared to let others know what they can do for help. So rather than being the burning martyr and saying, oh no, don't worry about it, say thank you. It would be really helpful if you could photocopy these for me, if you could send this email home to all my home learners, whatever it might be. Practice gratitude and patience. So the research suggests that those two concepts are really helpful emotional states, and that happy, healthy people practice without thinking about it. So you might describe those people as glass half full people, people who tend to see what they have, tend to look on the positives. Now, I didn't used to be a glass half full, as my family can attest to. Always tended to see what I didn't have and look on the downside. But you can train the brain to be more positive. And if it would help, at the beginning of every working day, just write down 3 things on a piece of paper that you feel grateful for. They can be small or large, and they'll differ from day to day. So it might be, I'm grateful for working in a nice school. I'm grateful for this cup of tea. I'm grateful, I don't know, whatever it might be, for being able to smell the roses. Patience, it stands to reason that patient people are less stressed. So if you can develop the qualities of patience and perseverance and delaying your gratification, that's only going to be helpful. So I'm working on that at the moment, and I've started doing puzzles. And, if they're easy enough, I quite enjoy them, but I get easily downhearted when I can't figure it out. But puzzles are good because they make me keep on trying. So you'll have your own ideas about what might help you develop gratitude and patience. So remember that we are our greatest resource when it comes to self-care. What happens in here is much more important than anything that other people can offer us or any external resources. So just become aware of your internal conversation. Is it critical? Is it judgmental? Is it negative? And at the outset, just become aware, and with kindness and compassion, just note, okay, that was quite judgmental. How could I be more positive? How often do you tell yourself how brilliant you are at your job and how lucky your school is to have your unique talents and skills? Maybe that's something to replace that negative conversation inside your head with. So manage your own perfectionism. A lot of us in roles and schools tend to be perfectionist and have really high standards for ourselves. So it is okay to be human and fallible. It is okay to have needs. It is okay to say, I'm not coping. So social support is really important, especially during the pandemic. So do use technology and video conferencing and calling to stay connected with friends and family. Make that a daily, a daily thing or a regular thing. Avoid overexposure to the news. It's all about COVID. It brings you down. Really question how much new stuff you're learning by watching the news or listening to the news a lot. And simply do more of what gives you pleasure. So during the pandemic, we really need to accept that this is an ongoing period of uncertainty that's likely to last a lot longer than our political leaders may be suggesting. And that means that there are limitations on what is achievable, what's possible. With all the extra demands on your time and resources, this is really, the only thing happening at the moment. Make well-being a strategic priorities for all stakeholders. So really, push this idea up the chain so your leaders are recognizing how important your well-being is to the, optimum functioning of your school organization. Incorporate well-being into the daily routine, not just of your children, but also of all of the staff and all of the people who come in to your school community. Ensure robust procedures for identifying those of us who need additional support, and make universal and targeted support interventions visible and well promoted. And if you have the resources and the opportunity, audit wellbeing in the school community, perhaps during lockdown and, outside of lockdown time, so that you have the data available when you need it. So to finish off, just some key learning points. Increase your daily exercise routine, but keep it simple. Breathing exercises and mindfulness will help you self-regulate and will help, bring that rest and recovery into your daily routine. Talking to somebody else and listening to somebody else will really help improve relationships in the school community. So if there's someone that you haven't spoken to much who's new, make an effort to connect with them. Smile at the receptionist, say good morning when you come in. Try to keep that going through the day. Make sure you're building in rest and recuperation at different points during the day. So always take your lunch as often as you can. Make sure that you eat healthily, you eat well, and you have some time out. Distraction techniques, games, crosswords, puzzles, all those things can be a useful strategy if you're under a particular amount of stress. Try to make sure that you're eating healthily, so you might cook more in the evening, so you're less likely to reach for the donuts that are sitting in the staff room waiting for you, because when you're tired, particularly, you're more likely to reach for fried food or sugary food. So eating and sleep, they're all interconnected. And make sure that you have some fun. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to end with a mindfulness exercise, and then we'll go on to the Q&A. Okay, so just make sure that you're sitting up straight. If you're in a chair, move your back away from the back of the chair if you're able. If not, support it with a cushion. And just straighten your back. So it's in a dignified posture, but not rigid. You might want to lower your chin slightly, so there's a slight stretch in the back of the neck, and place your feet flat on the floor. You can place your hands in your lap or on your thighs. And if you feel comfortable, feel free to close your eyes. If that doesn't feel comfortable, you might just lower your eyes and find a point in the mid-distance and focus on that point. So as you become still, just become aware of your breathing. And note what happens in the body as you take a breath in. And then again as you breathe out. Now remember, I can't see you or hear you, and no one else can. So it can be helpful to add a little bit of hiss or noise to your breath to make it more obvious to you. So what happens in your body? Can you feel your chest rise, your shoulders rise as you breathe in? There's a slight pause. And as you breathe out, there's a collapse. Your tummy drops, your shoulders drop. And again, there's a slight pause. So just keep breathing in and out. You don't need to breathe in any special way. But just keep your attention focused on the breath as it moves in and out. Each breath different and unique. each breath a chance to start again. Now you might notice, even during the course of this short mindfulness practice, that your mind wants to go off, or perhaps has run off, and you might notice that you're thinking about something entirely different. That's okay. That's just what the mind does. And in mindfulness, the practice is not to stop the mind from getting distracted, but to practice bringing it back to the focus on the breath. So using the breath to anchor our attention. You might notice your breath getting slower and deeper. And now to finish off, I want you to take the deepest breath you've taken all day and really see if you can stretch out the exhalation so that you push out all of the air in your lungs. Here we go. And when you're ready, open your eyes and bring your attention back to the room. I hope you enjoyed that. So we've come to the end of the webinar, except for the question and answer slot. So feel free to post any questions you have, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you have any questions or thoughts or experiences that you'd like to share about doing that mindfulness exercise, feel free to put that in the chat function too. So Jacqueline's asking about sleep. So sleep would be a whole another webinar of itself, Jacqueline, but I can suggest you don't have any devices in your room, the room that you sleep in. So plug your phone in outside your bedroom so you're not disturbed by the blue light and by any pinging through the night. It's a good idea to switch the television off before you're getting ready for bed, and reading can really help your brain adjust to getting ready for sleep. And if you really do have difficulties with sleeping, I would try something called yoga nidra. You don't need to know how to practice yoga to do this. It's just relaxation. And you can do it in the living room last thing at night. Just find one on YouTube. I'll just find a 10-minute one and do that on the living room floor if I'm having trouble sleeping. So give it a go. Yoga Nidra, Nidra. And from Catherine, thank you very much. Yeah, that's great to know that you're wanting to share all the well-being and self-care routines and ideas with your staff teams. So we really need to spread the good news.
Hey Bernadette, it's Natalie. There are a few comments in the chat, actually.
Okay.
Maybe jump into there as well.
Okay. I some reason don't have access to the chat function anymore.
near the
Oh, here we
bottom.
go. Here we go. Okay, I got it now, Natalie. Recommend any activities to promote wellbeing with school staff during this period of remote learning. I think any opportunity to just check in as a team using Zoom or whatever your video conferencing setup is a really good idea. Not necessarily to talk about work, but just to check in and see how people are and have a chat. So we do that every day in my team at the beginning of the day, and we talk about cats and dogs mostly, but it's been a real sort of lifesaver for those of us working from home. So I would really recommend that. Doing something like a mindfulness exercise. So if you don't feel confident, your SPM or Place to Be has some recordings of mindfulness exercises, and again, you can find them on YouTube. Yeah, writing things down. So the research suggests that writing, if you're feeling stressed or overwhelming, just writing stuff down. So you might have a journal or a workbook and just spend some time every day sort of writing whatever comes to mind. So free associating can be a really good strategy for calming down and relaxing. You know, it can be really hard to calm down when your mind is so busy after the working day. So the 5 steps were taken from the NHS website, but the Mind charity also has similar concepts. So check both of those out. Yeah, we need to talk about other things besides work. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for your questions and your feedback. Do look out for further Spotlight on webinars from Place to Be. Bye for now.